Grief is not a problem to solve. It's a human experience to move through, and most of us were never taught how. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, licensed psychologist and grief specialist. Welcome to Grief is the New Normal, where we change the conversation around loss one honest episode at a time. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited for today's guest. Joining us, we have Dr. Rohit Agarwal. He is a licensed clinical psychologist and practitioner at Center Focus Therapy in Chicago, Illinois. In his work with clients, Rohit challenges the impact of systemic oppressions on individuals and communities. He is passionate about demystifying mental health and combating internalized presumptions of power, privilege, and normalcy that have found a profound impact on community health. Outside of his involvement in the psychology field, Rohit is an avid Dungeons and Dragons player and game master and deeply believes in the power of tabletop gaming as a vehicle for storytelling, creative expression, and community connection. He is currently building up his social media channel and presence to combine gaming, storytelling, and liberation psychology. Be sure to check out Free Action when it goes live in winter 2025. Dr. Rohit, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
So, do you mind sharing a little bit about what got you into the field of psychology, especially such a cool niche?
No, absolutely. So I actually got really into psychology when I was like 12, like way too early, I think. And this is actually kind of where my journey with what I didn't realize at the time was grief started. I grew up in a neighborhood that was mostly white kids and a few other Indian kids, but that was the majority, the like definition of diversity there. And among them, I was like not the brightest, like super not the brightest, was definitely like struggling. I was still in the upper 10, 15%, but I was always, there was so much comparison. You always felt like you're at the bottom. And so I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was like broken in some way. And so I started
Mhm.
looking to psychology books to be like, oh, these people know how to be smart. And so I started reading those books and it was like, oh, like this is different. This is not what I thought it was. And when I started reading those books, I was like, but this is fascinating. This is not, I'm not getting the answers that I wanted, but I'm also learning that we know very little about intelligence. We know very little about people, really, the human condition, honestly. And it's what got me really into existential psychology and various philosophers who have commented on that. And then more intersectional philosophy as I started to further through grad school, especially, and started really understanding systems of oppression and
Mm.
how they create a lot of the concerns that we have today. And if they don't create them, then they really heighten them. For example, my dissertation was on personality disorders and how the kind of vilifying of people with personality disorders renders them not able to live normally, but also not worthy of care. Because I was trying to interview psychologists who treated them, and I found very few who were willing to treat people with personality disorders. And I was like, where are these people supposed to go? And
Totally.
doing the research showed, oh wow, people are like denied care because of who they are. People are denied care because of a diagnosis that was given to them. I worked with several personality disordered folks who did not have a personality disorder, but were diagnosed as such. And it's, wow, there's something up in the field of psychology as well that I want to make sure is being talked about because it's dangerous if we're not talking about it. And so basically, long story long, from 12 years old till now, I've pretty much just noticed like something's up. And it feels like we're making a lot of assumptions on our day to day, and assumptions of normalcy is like the big one. Oh, what is safe? What is acceptable? And when I see all of that, I'm like, wow, a lot of people are very unhappy with normalcy. So
Mm.
what are we doing if this is our normal?
That's so interesting. Upset with the normalcy piece. And just thinking about in hearing you describe that, and what comes up for me is, yeah, within the umbrella of grief, right? Like none of it feels normal. And I think that's why we've limited understanding grief to a stage based model, because we want it to end. We want the pain to go away because we want to get back to normal, when it's like there's not a getting back to. It's just integrating into your new way of being. So yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, think about like
Exactly.
social medias and TikToks. I have OCD. Oh, they're a narcissist. Like the
Mhm.
actual clinical population percentages in the flawed DSM. It's a really low percentage. And yet, if you go on social media, it seems like it's everywhere.
I think that social media has had a huge role in, again, it's very much a double-edged sword where it's, yes, people are talking about it, people are seeking out therapy, and people are going to therapy. And yet it's like people are going to therapy more, mental health crisis is more. So how do those numbers match up? I don't believe it's supply demand. My grad school program had 5 times the number of people in it than the previous year. So I think that the supply is there. It makes me wonder, going about this systemically in the correct way to address issues. And that's why the liberation psychology comes in for me of it has to exist outside of the room. You can't just pretend the world is fine, you are not, because immediately that's us upholding systems of oppression as psychologists. And
Yeah.
I'm not about that.
Yeah. For listeners who aren't familiar with the concept of liberation psychology, can you give us like a high level overview of what that means?
The person who founded it was a Jesuit priest who understood that psychology was not serving the Latin American population, the
Mm.
contexts of the Latin American population. And I think that expanded outward into realizing, oh, psychology does not understand oppression. Psychology doesn't understand oppression on a systemic level. It understands it on an individual level, but it's ignoring it on the systemic level and how all these, the same effects that a lot of people go through, traumas that everybody goes through, racial trauma is a big thing that came out of studies of liberation psychology. These are all things that are on a systemic level that, again, if we're not doing anything about that, all we're doing is putting a band-aid on a cut, on a broken bone, really, honestly. And there's no healing that it can really be sustainably done if it is just about, let's make you not sad. Let's
Mm.
make you not this anymore. Like you said, with the development of grief, of like, let's get to that last stage. That's something I hear a lot from clients. It's, I just want to get to acceptance. I'm like, that sounds like denial. Let's talk about that process of the fact that there are these stages, but everybody sees those stages as linear. And that's kind of also that danger of social media is that people see it and they're like, oh yeah, there's a process. Everybody goes through this. I need to just go through it. That's not true. And that's not accurate. And that's also makes it dangerous. So going back to liberation psychology with the presentation by Dr. Diaz talking about accompanying your clients, walking through their inner world, which is what matches so well with me. Storytelling is I love hearing people's stories. I love being part of their stories, walking with them through it, having them be a tour guide, show me around if they want to, show me parts they are proud of, show me their strengths, show me the stuff that they're still working on, the things that are
Mm.
works in progress. And if they ask for my help with that, I can help with that. And that's the point of liberation psychology from my perspective, is seeing life is very difficult to live sometimes, and systems make that very difficult to live. And if there are ways that we can be with one another, whether it's through being in the therapy space together or advocacy outside of it or mutual aid projects outside of it, then that's the way that we can start to actually get some sort of systemic heal
Mm.
versus just focusing on the person themselves.
Yeah, I like that it's understanding the ripples, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, you are your own contained unit, and yet we're connected to all of these different systems, whether they're flawed or functional. And so if we're wanting to create change within that, like how are we moving outside of just that microcosm and rippling that out to the many? And even like from a family systems therapy approach, that's what we talk about. If you get even one person in a family system in therapy, there's going to be ripples into the bigger unit. And so if we can get more people into that, then there's bigger ripples that can happen. And but you're also talking about advocacy outside of the space and mutual aid projects. And I think that's such a lovely blend of like social work and psychology and empowerment. And yeah, thank you for
Absolutely.
the overview.
Of course. Yeah, no, very much a rudimentary overview. There's several helpful books. If you just look up liberation psychology, you'll find the name I forgot.
I'll look it up and link something in the show links.
I appreciate that.
Okay, you shared a little bit that grief can be a turning point for people to reconnect with their values and emotional truth. Can you say a little more about what grief reveals and how that can be liberating and not just painful?
Absolutely. Now, I think feeling in general, and so grief has a big part of that. Feeling in general is what reveals our truths, the things that we care about, the things that we are even conditioned to care about. Sometimes there are things that we're like, why do I care about this? I don't really understand why I care about this. And you're lucky if you're asking yourself that question. Within the idea of grief, when we feel the awareness of transition or the awareness of pain, oftentimes we realize just how much we care or cared about something, but it also reveals a lot about what matters to us. I think ultimately grief is about meaning, and it's about the fact that we exist within relationships with one another, and we exist within those connections. We accompany one another. Again, that's a part of liberation psychology of accompanying. And it can be very liberating to connect with these things that we care about, even if it is through the grief of them, through the loss of them. And I think that existential grief, which is again more my camp where existential liberation coincide, there's this awareness, there's the memento mori that the awareness that we all die someday, the awareness that everybody around us dies someday. And that can often feel like too much. I know I've overwhelmed some friends with conversations about this who are not necessarily in the field, but there's sometimes this realization when we take a step back from everything, from the stress of work or transition from one job to another or the loss of a loved one, there's this feeling of life being inherently meaningless. And then life becomes, and this is partially a choice, and this is partially through being accompanied, life becomes about meaning making. It becomes about this awareness of what matters and then meeting up with what matters for yourself. People, when they start to care about what they care about, when they start to realize, oh, my job matters, but it's not everything. Right? My relationship with this person matters, but it's not everything. It can't be everything. Because if I put everything into this, that's where all the stress is going to come out.
Hmm.
Right? I'm going to burn myself out at work. I'm going to start having conflict at home if everything that I care about is everything for me. And I'm not saying to not invest in your relationship, but when people are so overinvested that any diversion from an expectation causes like great struggle, then we have to wonder, okay, how deeply implanted or enmeshed are you in this? And with the grief of an argument, the grief of a breakup, like what are you learning about yourself in this process? We'll hold the grief together, hold the sadness together. But sitting in that sadness sometimes is about sitting in that meaning.
Hmm.
What meaning comes to light there? And so I think that's the way that it can end up being very liberating, is because people will then connect to what holds meaning for them, and then they can go through that process of meaning making. And not every experience is going to be deeply meaningful. Right? You still have to wash your dishes, but you can have peace in those moments, and that can be the meaning. But you don't
The
need to
ritual
seek
of it.
the ritual of
Yeah. Just sorry, as you were talking about, like, the meaning of doing dishes, I'm like, I love doing dishes.
it.
My partner even knows if we're having a fight or if I'm really stressed about something, don't do the dishes because I'll put music on and I'll do the dishes, and something about cleaning my sink, it's almost like I'm putting my thoughts back in order and helping me move through whatever I'm stuck in, and this was a really big point of contention in the start of our relationship. I said I'd do the dishes, and I was like, "But they weren't getting done, so I just gonna do them," and then I was like, "Did you notice that every time we fight, I go do the dishes?" And helped him make that connection of the ritual of that for me. So I think you can totally make meaning from doing you talked about how, like, when we experience the loss, that can open our awareness up to the impact that something has had or the importance of it. And I love that premise of talking about grief as a catalyst because I think you're right. So often we're just in our day to day rhythms and routines, and we're not aware of how we're spending our spoons or investing our time and energy and resources and capacity. And then a grief event happens, whether it's divorce, job loss, physical death, and it's like it brings to the forefront those things that are important and that we want to invest more in, but we didn't necessarily have awareness of how we were investing in those things pre-grief experience. And so I think you mentioning that just made me think of, yeah, that grief as a catalyst I think is so important.
It's always fascinating to witness the transition of it being an experience of only pain, because that's the fear of being in grief, right? Is I'll be in pain forever if I feel these feelings. And seeing that 10 times out of 10, it's not the case. That you do feel pain, but that it doesn't end, but it does transform.
Yeah, absolutely. So you work with men, especially men of color, who've been taught to quote unquote stay strong or suppress emotion. How does that kind of cultural norm shape their relationship with grief?
Yeah, no, I think that the cultural norms rob men of a human experience. And I think that's in a way accidental, in a way purposeful. People are a lot easier to control when they don't feel passionate about things. And that's the systemic part of it, right? So with men, especially when, and men of color, especially when suppressing one emotion. So they express sadness. I notice immediately, I ask my male clients, do you feel joy? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, but they're kind of half saying it. And they, in that moment that I'm asking them, like, do you feel joy and excitement? They don't. And we realize that it's not, you could choose and press some buttons of sadness and anger. You could just like never press those ones and just keep pressing the joy button. When you stop pressing all the buttons, right? When you stop pressing one button, you stop pressing all the buttons. Inside Out does a very good job of that, of showing us that message. And that's what we see oftentimes. What I see oftentimes with men is that the restriction of one leads to the restriction of all. And then it comes out in these ways that are extremely sensitive and these ways that are very, I would say, terrifying to them. And the reason why I say terrifying is because it threatens their ideas of masculinity, because oftentimes they have that arrested development of, they haven't, some of them boast, I haven't cried since I was 6, I haven't cried since I was 7. Okay, when you cry next, you're going to cry as if you're 7. And that's going to feel weird for you. And it's going to feel weird because I'm an adult man and you're an adult man and we are in conversation with one another and you're going to fear that. And oftentimes that is what is happening, is that they fear that vulnerability and they fear the vulnerability of being seen. A lot of times what it is that men want to be seen, but fear being seen at the exact same time. And so the relationship to grief is so strange because, again, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. There's going to be transformation. There's going to be loss. There's going to be pain. And a lot of them are like, I just need to withstand it better. No, you don't. It's about feeling it. And again, learning what you care about. And again, that's why I think men get robbed of this, is because then they're robbed of caring, truly caring, out of a want to care. They'll fear, right? They'll definitely be afraid. I need to keep this job. I care about this job because if I don't have it, something bad will happen. And I play this little game with all my clients called Follow the Fear, which is if they're afraid of something, then I will follow that train of thought with them as to what it ends up in. It always ends up with one of the existential fears. At the end, it's always a fear of powerlessness. It's always something related to grief and loss and fearing pain at the end. I fear being powerless, not having a job, my relationships. It all comes back to meaning pain, really, in the end, and avoidance of pain and what people are willing to do to avoid pain. This is where bell hooks stuff comes in so strongly, because shame is such a huge component of all of this. Again, being seen, being known, being vulnerable. When people are restricted from that, and then the shame gets so high, then this is also what leads to higher suicide rates in men.
Sure.
This relates to the numbers being 2 times higher than women. And that was astounding to read, but then really starts to make sense because that shame and that powerlessness becomes the place where death becomes preferable to pain, because they have no sense of ability to sit through that pain. And so I think that not being able to go through grief and that emotional restrictiveness really does contribute to all of this pain and suffering. And if we're calling it the male loneliness epidemic, if we're calling it the mental health crisis, this is a lot of what we're referring to.
No, I think that's so important to name. The shame piece is huge, and identity, and yeah, so many good nuggets in that. I loved your phrase, the follow the fear, like that pulling on the thread of, okay, yes, this is what's showing up right now. And then what's the layer below and what's the layer below that? And getting down to those, that funneling down to those existential pieces of fear and pain. Cause you're right. Like, living is painful. And yes, there's moments of joy and love and connection. And there's a lot of there's a lot of disconnect. And especially these days in this kind of post-COVID world, there's so much division and disconnection that it's probably amplifying the shame, fear responses and wanting to avoid that.
Because
Yeah.
that shame can lead to so many things, right? And those things are not feeling out the emotion. And
Right.
we start to see it just manifest everywhere again, like substance abuse, family conflict. And
Totally.
as we're mentioning in post-COVID, like political ideology, extremism, we're seeing
Mhm.
the inevitable effects of conditioning on people. And it's scary, but it's also deeply systemic.
Yeah, absolutely. The image that's popping in my head is like, with the suppression of feelings, it's like shaking up the Diet Coke bottle, and it's like that one thing you're adding that Mentos in, which is the catalyst, and then it's exploding in a way that's uncomfortable and scary. Yeah, even thinking about within the grief context, like there's a spectrum of how grief shows up. You have the intuitive type grieving, which is more crying, external verbal processing. On the other end, you have instrumental, which is more internalized and stoic and reserved and maybe action oriented or project based. And people can go along the spectrum, but it's not defined by gender identity. And so if you're typically a stoic, more reserved male and you're presenting more of an intuitive griever and crying, like that's going to feel uncomfortable, or am I doing this wrong? And I think that's where that education piece about how grief shows up differently can be so important, and normalizing that, yeah, you're in pain and it's going to look different depending on where you're at, the loss, relationship, all of those things, and that there's not one right way to do it. And it's going to look different for you.
And that's another layer of the things is the judgment. If you're sitting there being like, am I grieving enough? All that precludes actually grieving. And so sometimes in my practice, at least, the part of the follow the fear, sometimes they even call it a game with them, is part of the game of follow the fear is it starts from an intellectual place, someplace where I can meet people who are trying to intellectualize their grief. And then as we pass through, we start to check in. How's your body feeling as we're talking about some of these fears and what's coming out? And that approach sometimes is a lot easier to stay in that judgment because we're just curious, right?
Sure.
Just curious right now. That's
Exactly.
very authentic and real that we are curious about the depths of these fears. Both of us, when we're bent up in that curiosity, judgment doesn't really have a place there. And that can really help, again, stay that judgment. I really use this a lot when I'm, again, with clients of judgment's over there right now. You
Yep.
and I are here. Let's just talk this out because something's happening and the judgment's not helping.
I think that curiosity reframe is so powerful. Because it's neutral. It's the most neutral emotion we can have is curiosity. And it's letting, like you said, keeping judgment over here. And we're staying in that curiosity land. And I love the intro with using it as a game, because I think it's almost like when you're walking around a labyrinth and you're trying to find your way in, right? It's like by premising it as like the game of follow the fear. It's okay, that's going to help me have my entry into the labyrinth to do the deeper work, because a game seems harmless. A game is just, I can intellectualize that. I can have a strategy. I can follow the rules. And then you get into the feelings of it because you're in the labyrinth, but it's hard to find that way in. I like it. So you mentioned a little bit earlier just about when we don't talk about the emotions and we've suppressed them. You've named that emotional disconnection turning into things like substance use, family conflict, and extremism. What do you think's happening under the surface, and how do we begin to interrupt that cycle?
I think what is happening on the surface with all those is there's a disconnection that people are experiencing with even the idea of connection, the idea of human connection, the idea of human relationship. So sometimes alcohol or other substances are ways for people to feel related to others, feel in connection, in community with others. And it's ways for them to let loose, feel more comfortable, and that can turn into addiction very quickly. And there's an idea of I need this in order to feel connected to others. Now, there's the physical addiction component, but then there's also what happens with that of I need this in order to. And we see that even with marijuana, even if it's not addictive or other substances that are not addictive, they are addicted to the feeling, right? And used to the feeling that of this is what will give me connection and not being able to deal with or go through the messiness of actual connection. And so that's what I usually see with like substance use, family conflict, again, the same way. There's a way that we relate, and the only way I know to relate is anger. How to relate is by yelling, because either that's what I saw growing up, or I can't exist in the messiness of anything else. A different kind of messiness shows up instead. And so that's where we also then see, with that extremism, that's actually one of the most, I would say, difficult of them all because there is a provision of community. There's a provision of connection, the thing that they are looking for. They're looking to be connected. And instead, they find communities that are guided oftentimes by violence and oftentimes by righteousness, self-righteousness, anger. And there's nothing wrong with anger, but when it is used to vilify the other, when it is used to push the other out, and that's really where we start to see that extremism being something that people use as coping for things that they are feeling, threats, powerlessness, transitions, right? All those things people, even thinking about like anti-trans things, people grieve the loss of the gender binary as something that they grew up with and they're able to deal with that. They're unable to deal with the fact that things are changing from what they knew. And there's a fear, a deep fear within that, that then comes out with, oh, I'm going to find other people who agree with me. and then yell about it, right? And get really violent about it. And that's a source of community, that's a source of connection. It's just not great. Right?
Yeah.
And it's very harmful within that. So a way to interrupt that cycle, and this is really challenging, is the intervention by people who do care, right? Those who see their loved ones disconnect. And it's very difficult. It's like hugging a porcupine, right? You're trying to get close to something that doesn't want to hurt you, but naturally does. And making that connection, building those bridges is the slow process of letting people know, hey, I'm here for you if you need to talk. I could talk about anything with you. You may annoy me. I may annoy you. But if we can exist in that messiness, then that's great. And that's a way that I think people don't need to be therapists for one another, but they can be therapeutic with one another. They can be in healing messy relationships with one another. And that's hard. Sometimes it does require getting them into seeing a therapist and starting to deconstruct some of these ideas or discuss some of them in a safe, again, non-judgmental way. And that's hard to create because the culture is not led to those spaces existing. That's why our jobs are necessary, honestly. And that's how we start to deconstruct or interrupt these cycles, is by caring for people who are starting to identify with the oppressor. And that's, again, very challenging. So some of the work that I do outside of my therapeutic work is being aware of internalized white supremacy. I also do that in my work, but how internalized white supremacy in the South Asian community is huge. There's this proximity to whiteness that comes with, from everything of not speaking native tongues, not connected to the religion of Hinduism, to skin bleaching, right? To look white. And when we have those elements on proximity to power, we start to see people finding community or connection within power. And that's not quite it, right? Because there's always a difference between those people, between South Asians and white folks. And while there is that desire to connect, there is a rejection, an ultimate rejection. So some of the work that I do is to connect with and inform and educate about how deep this is in our generational psyche. 400 years of colonialism is going to have that impact on somebody. And so I do talk about that decolonizing of people. And that's also within liberation psychology, is the decolonizing of, let's see how the systems have impacted you to believe what you believe. Let's go back into what you care about. And let's grieve the fact that has happened. And it starts with sorrow. It starts with, I am sorry that this has happened to you, that you've lived your life in this way that has been so painful, that you thought that this was normal, that you thought that this is what you needed to be in order to be normal. And it wasn't. You were always fine. And that's sometimes met with derision, and sometimes that is met with tears, and sometimes with a combination of both, mostly the combination. And it's extremely complex, but having that kind of like firm hand and grasp out to somebody saying, it is okay to be the way you are. Let's talk about the ways you don't want to be.
I think that's so powerful, making that space, the coming at it with, like, how do we care? I think leading with empathy and curiosity, I think, is such a lovely bridge. It's like basic oars, basic motivational interviewing skills, open-ended questions and reflecting and all of that. It's like it's holding space for a conversation without needing to win the conversation and not needing to talk louder to get your point across, but just like, how do I approach that from that place of curiosity and connection? And this is someone I've historically cared about. And like, how do we open a window to more exploration, to a different kind of connection to help with challenging, reframing, all of that? I think that's so important. Yeah,
Curiosity and empathy are the cornerstone of all, right? That's where it's got to start.
absolutely. Okay, listeners, we're going to take a super quick break for a message from this episode's sponsor. We'll join back with you in just a minute.
Are you a healthcare provider who's worked with grieving patients? We want to hear from you. This study, Grief Training and Education in Healthcare, an exploratory study, is inviting healthcare professionals across disciplines medicine, psychology, social work, nursing, occupational therapy, physical therapy, naturopathy, and more to complete a 30-minute anonymous survey exploring attitudes towards grief and perceived preparedness to support grieving patients. Your insight will help shape future grief education in healthcare, and inform best practices across professions. Participation is voluntary and anonymous, and you can complete the survey online. Please visit our website to learn more and take part in this important study. Together, we can move toward more grief informed care. Thank you.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us through the ad. I have us joining with us, Dr. Rohit, and we've been chatting about liberation psychology and grief and emotions in working with men and suppression and oppression and all the things. So, tapping back into what we were talking about earlier, for a client or someone who's spent years pushing their feelings down, especially grief, how do you help them begin to reconnect with what they're feeling in a safe, grounded way?
Yeah, I think safe and grounded is exactly the start of it. Simple joy and rest is often how I start with folks. As I mentioned, when you're restricting one, you're restricting all. So we start to see what sparks a little bit. Joy is approachable. Rest is approachable. We get into what people find themselves caring about, right? Is it nature? Do they like to go on walks? Is it being with a friend? Or is it music, right? Is it movies? That's also where some of the media stuff starts to come in. And so an exercise that I often do with folks that helps out, and again, starts intellectual and then goes into the more somatic stuff, is we do the values card sorting exercise. I do that a lot with folks who are having trouble determining not only what they care about, but why they care about it. And being able to figure out, oh, I value this, but I don't personally value this. I just know I'm supposed to value this. Huge disconnect, right? When you've driven your entire life towards something you personally don't value. And for example, again, like if you're in a certain career path, you're like, I never actually wanted to do this because I'm in the South Asian community. I never actually wanted to do this, but here I am doing it. And it's hard to feel motivated to keep doing it. Am I mad? Motivation are you operating on? Right. And it's not that everybody can just go through a dramatic career change. So it's how do we find motivation? What do you care about within your work? Because you're here, you must have cared about something along the way. And we take that grief of here is what happened that led to you feeling like you needed to do this. And I'm sorry that is what you had to experience. Yeah. What can we do now? And that's a big focus of the existential is the here and now of we can't do anything to fix the past. We can't do anything to change it. It just has changed us. And so let's acknowledge where we're at now, how we have been changed by it. And then, and it's not about moving on. It's not about correcting. It is about who am I now that I didn't realize I was. And once the kind of integration has happened, then we can take steps forward. And that's where we go from like the kind of small and grounded into the kind of bigger picture. And the same thing with small and grounded going into somatic stuff, feeling out your breath, feeling out your body, and tapping your feet and groundedness, even starting with all of those. Again, all of this is to get away from that judgment for a sec, because that judgment, again, interrupts every single stage of this process, whether it's internalized family judgment, mostly internalized family judgment, internalized social judgment, those pieces that can really hinder the process of actually understanding yourself or the process of even trying to get to know yourself. And so we go from safe and grounded to something a little bit messier and human, go into a process of more internalized validation rather than external invalidation, that your emotions end up being like a data source. Your emotions end up being this signal, right? It's a signaling system rather than an internal enemy that's just trying to make you feel bad. And we often get that when people are like, my brain wants me to feel bad. I was like, your brain's you. So let's talk about what that means, that we're separating brain from self. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes, especially with men, going down the intellectualized route is a place where I can meet them where they're at with their coping. And then we just back away. We just back away into the emotional, into the somatic things they're a little less used to, but they're willing to explore with me.
Yeah. I like that's the sneak attack approach.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess what does it look like then when men begin to reclaim that emotional expression, especially through grief work? And I guess bigger question, what cultural shifts do you think we need to truly support that transformation?
Yeah, I think again, this is where Bell Hooks comes in and can say everything that I'm about to say and way more. It's already all written down somewhere. But that guidance is essentially about redefining masculinity. It is about really challenging again, where do your personal values of masculinity, your personal values of emotion and expression come from? Is that truly how you feel about it? Is that truly where you want to go with it?
Yeah.
And how is that, like a big question, how's that going for you? You're here, right? So must not be going super well. And so we want to have that conversation. And again, as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit like this with my clients, humorous, sassy, a little bit. I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
there's a humor to all of this. And part of that is the existential nature of, oh, we can look at a lot of this and laugh at how absurd a lot of it is. But I think that is partially my role, is to show that you can feel emotions in a lighthearted setting, in a messy setting. I'm going to be here with you. You're going to feel those feelings that you're feeling. And I may be the first person who you experience as not bullying you for it, not belittling you for it, not telling you like you're not supposed to do that. I'm just going to sit here and be like, yeah, absolutely. Cry, please. Get angry. Scream into that pillow. Like, I'm the first person for a lot of these folks who's ever validated it that way. And I know that after they leave the therapy hour, they're going out into the larger world that doesn't have that. And again, that kind of goes back into liberation, is that within the therapy space, they have that hour where they can do that. But then they can do that at home. Right? Then they can be in relationship with folks who understand that, with folks who understand them, or folks who have even a messy understanding of that. And so I think that on a larger scale, there is a need for more education, but redefining what we need to be educating people about. I often hear with folks who are having kids, and just friends and clients alike, where they're like, oh, thank goodness I'm having a boy. I'm like, oh, what? They're like, oh, because it's easier. What do you mean it's easier? They don't have to learn as much. I can just kind of let them be. They can just do whatever. I'm like, are you sure about that? I don't think you should be so sure about that. We should talk about that. And there's this idea of, I don't have to invest as much. They'll take care of themselves. They're not in danger, right? So that one of the fears about raising girls that they have is, oh, they're going to be in more danger. I'm like, I get that. But that doesn't mean that you can ignore the boys. It's not even necessarily about danger, but sometimes they could become the danger. Oftentimes they could become the danger, as much as we don't want to admit it when we see a child, right? And we don't want to imagine, but everybody who's ever been abusive, everybody who's ever been in everything that we just talked about was once a child. And so it becomes really important to educate parents about how to actually raise boys who are strong, but not oppressive, and who are caring without being obsessive about that care, and who can be in messiness in relationship, who can communicate, to be people that the kids can come to and be emotional with, without saying boys don't cry, but boys don't get mad. It's just, then what the heck do they do? That's not what life is about. And so this is about teaching all kids and educating all kids on, this is how to have a good life. And to have a good life, it's not like you need this, that, or the other. Be human and let me not restrict you. And that's what parents need to learn, is let me not restrict you from these elements of being human that even I didn't know about. And that's the intergenerational work. That's harder, of course. It's not an easy thing by all means, but it is so very necessary in order to stop the kinds of things that we see today.
Absolutely. As a parent of 2 tiny humans, I have one of each, and it's like, we educate all the time. It's okay to be mad. It's not okay to hurt others when you're mad. It's okay to be sad. I wanna hold your feet. I will be with you as you're riding the emotional current. And we have this one book, it's called The Boy with Big, Big Feelings, and it's one of my son's favorite books, and it's all about, like, just his sensitivity, and he takes in so much from the world around him and has unexpected emotions coming up, and how do we find connection in that versus shaming ourselves or isolating because we're sensitive or have big feelings, and what are safe, good ways to connect through those emotions and like process through them. We were talking a little bit before the show about metabolizing bigger feelings out. Like, we get to model that for our tiny humans as well. And I think to your language around, well, having a boy and it's easier, and you said they could become the dangers. Yes, this is why we have to educate all of our kids on what does it mean to be a good human, talk about consent, talk about privilege, like all of these things, because that's what's going to have those intergenerational ripples and make those systemic changes. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And it's a big responsibility. Both kids are equally hard in very different ways. At least that's my lived experience.
And I was with a grain of salt. I am not a parent myself. I've just witnessed a lot of parenting. I used to work with a lot of kids and their parents as well. And that was back before grad school when I was doing like ABA work. And when I
Oh,
was doing the ABA work, I was witnessing parent-child interactions. And I was like, oh, interesting. I'm witnessing a lot of this happen. And again, taking with a grain of salt, I do not have kids of my own. But at the same time, I'm witnessing like, oh, I know it's very difficult, but there's a lot of things that are being missed here that I'm witnessing happen that at the time I did not have any role or any sort of place of expertise to say something's happening here. I think that now it becomes even more the way that we educate young boys and young men and how they're conditioned even as early as their like elementary school years. Like see how that can have a deep impact later on because we have that idea boys will be boys. Yeah, they will. That should be terrifying if it's not redefined.
I totally agree. Yes. So, in thinking about that community aspect, grief can be really isolating, especially for people socialized to hide pain, right? So, how do you approach building community around grief, especially for those who are used to carrying it alone?
Yeah, I think within my own practice, a big part of it is acknowledging, first off, my own humanity, that when they share pain, I feel it as well. And I think it's important for men to witness other men be in pain, be able to show pain, be able to show that they make mistakes. Sometimes I'm late to appointments. Sometimes I spill my coffee on my shirt. These aren't purposeful things, they just happen. I am human. When they see that, I notice a change. I notice that there is he's just like a guy, right? Because I'm just a guy. I go through things, and as much as they do, I just chose this to do with my life, right? And that's our only major difference. And so when they see that, sometimes they see that vulnerability that isn't just about the breaking point for me. They see vulnerability of, oh, I'm just a guy, that we can have this interaction without there being judgment, this interaction without me, again, belittling, bullying them, or without them doing that same thing to me. And so when we, again, stay that judgment, we're able to have a corrective experience. And again, like the outside world is not going to be full of those corrective experiences, but they know it's possible. And once they know it's possible, they know what to look for. They know
Yeah.
what to look for in terms of, yes, it's isolating for me right now, but maybe I'm aware I can make this connection with this old friend who I saw these qualities in. Maybe I can be one with this community. This is also like, even in isolation, you can listen to music and relate to the singer, relate to the artist, and relate to communities where they're talking about this, doing the social justice work when people are feeling very isolated in their grief and they see others who feel equally isolated, but then they're together. That can be super empowering as well. And so for those who are used to carrying it alone, yeah, I think that it is very difficult to make connection. It's very difficult to take that first leap. So I see myself as a stepping stone, first off, within the practice. And then outside of the practice, again, bumping up against the various kinds of conditioning people have. This is where, again, kind of curiosity comes in. So if you have that curiosity about something that you're seeing in the world, yes, you may get hurt, but through therapy, we've learned that's not the end.
Mm.
People may feel rejected. People may feel like, oh, this person's not that interested in me. And that's not the end of the world. And that's something that we worry through the process. So that way when they're going outside, they can try. And it's okay to try. And it's okay to fail. So we talk a lot about failure as well and how failure isn't death. Failure isn't the end. Because there's a lot of people in the world. So you can make a connection somewhere.
Yeah, I like that approach of humanizing yourself. And yes, I am still a man. This is just what I happen to do with my life. I think it helps with building rapport. It helps with reducing that power differential that can come from the therapeutic space. Like the therapist has all the answers and like we've got it all figured out when we're
Yeah.
just as messy. And we've just maybe spent more time on the other side of the couch and have worked through some of our own stuff so we can hold space for our clients. And I think that's so beautiful showing up in that humanity with your clients and normalizing like, yeah, I am a guy and I can be messy and like we can emote in a healthy way where it's a normalized thing. Okay, so into the fun stuff. So you use storytelling, games, and media to help people access feelings that are otherwise locked away. What makes creative storytelling such a powerful tool in the work that you do?
So there's this running joke within TTRPG, especially like D&D. TTRPG is tabletop role-playing games.
Thank
Sorry.
you. I was going to ask for I know, we gotta break the acronyms
I was
down
just
for
ready to
listeners.
go. Within D&D, within Dungeons and Dragons, there's this running joke that people always end up putting a little bit of themselves, or sometimes a lot of themselves, into their characters. And often, since they're playing it out in a place that has fewer restrictions or consequences than the real world, then they're able themselves. They're able to put into action that part of themselves. So storytelling like pushes up against that, where it's like, oh, okay, you are trying to be more you. Let's tell a story about what it's like for you to be more you. And then it's the same thing about seeing me in the therapy space being human. It's once you've witnessed that, it becomes easier to access that because you know it exists. Because until you know it exists, then you don't know if you could trust that. But then when you see it in tabletop, it's essentially like a simulation almost. You can be that. And I think that's the basis behind D&D therapy. Now, while I don't run my own D&D therapy spaces, that is something that we're very excited about that. But while I don't do that, I'm aware of several research projects that I've gone through. There's one that was actually presented at APA about a study that was of veterans at Rush, and that was astounding to see these veterans go through a short D&D campaign addressing very specific things that they had gone through in combat and in their time in the military, and being able to reprocess them without there being any actual danger. It was astounding to hear about how they got to feel all those things fire out. Oh, this is like, I'm in this situation. I'm safe. It is okay for me to feel the way that I'm feeling about this. It's
Mm.
stressful for sure, and it's intense, but it is okay to express. And I think that is a very novel experience. And that's one of the reasons why storytelling, especially gaming, can be useful for that within video games. You resonate with a character really strongly and you really appreciate their story. I know that one example of this that I always come back to with some of my clients is there's this game, Baldur's Gate 3, and there's a character in it who's undergoing religious trauma. And they never
Mm.
say it. But regardless, there's multiple characters going through it, and a lot of fans actually reached out to the voice actors and the actors who played that character and expressed seeing your story, seeing this story play out was huge for me because I was raised in a deeply religious and oppressive place. And that's the story of that character, is like being raised in this deeply oppressive religion and being able to make choices to define their relationship with faith. And that's something you can explore in story, that's something you can explore in games. And people really got a lot of meaning out of that and a lot of community out of that as well, where they felt safe and seen, heard, even if they were, again, in isolation, playing it on their couches alone, they're still seeing this play out. And in that moment, they're with a larger part of the community, even if it's like an invisible force, there's this connectedness. I feel seen right now, and it's safe for me to feel seen right now. And that's a really cool way to use stories and games to do that.
And so cool that they reached out to the voice actor because they felt so seen in that. I think that's why I like bibliotherapy so much is I'll talk about romantasy. I'll talk about
Mhm.
fairy smut with my clients because they're like, I felt so, I related to that character. And so I'll read the books that they're reading so we can have that rapport. But I think having that game building, especially like my partner does World of Warcraft. And so it's like that game is always evolving in new chapters and worlds and
Absolutely.
whatever. And it's like you're able to find connection, community through those platforms, as well as like relatability to the stories and the characters you're building and the choices you're making, the emotions that are coming in. I think that's such a cool, newly tapped into resource these days within the therapy space. And there's so much power in story.
And that's the same thing with games, with storytelling, music. The keyword I use with everybody is resonance. And that's actually a big theme in my own D&D game. As you can see, my books and all my stuff back there is resonance, is how people resonate with one another. They're not always in harmony with one another, but there is this resonance with story, with themes. Again, kind of back to grief and grief revealing what we care about. Stories reveal what we care about, the themes that we care about, and they can be evoked in us in these very unexpected ways, realizing like, I did not realize this mattered to me so much. And suddenly it's everything. Suddenly it's so overwhelming, but it's processable because it's in front of you. You can turn off the game. If you feel too overwhelmed, you can always come back to it. But there is something deeply human about that resonance of those stories that I think is so well captured by a lyric, even like a melody, or even like cooking, honestly, like creative pursuits like cooking, like scents, that bring back memories and resonance of this is something related to my story. And that feels like I'm being seen. And that feels like something I care about is being called for.
Yeah, I love that. That resonance piece, I think. Yeah, because then we're able to feel seen in other stories, we feel connected, we feel known, and it's like it's not just those external presentations, it's that internal stuff that can be really hard to access, but if we can have that mutual connection through a character, through a story, it's, "Oh, I'm seeing a part of you that isn't just external, it's internal." So, you have an upcoming project, Free Action, which blends gaming with liberation psychology. Can you share about the game, and then also how role-playing or fantasy settings can help support grief exploration, emotional rehearsal, all the healing fun things?
Free Action is going to be like a social media channel. It's going to be a YouTube channel that my wife and I are coming up with, like themes and content within it. And what the point of it is to be able to connect with emotion. There is a lot of conflict that can come up through D&D, whether it's like player to player or within the game or within friend groups. And a lot of times those are the questions that you see online. Oh, I have this conversation. How do I do this with this person? It's like, it doesn't feel like a big enough deal to bring into like therapy, but it feels like a big enough deal that it's affecting me day to day. Okay, as long as I'm not going to bring it to therapy, I talk to clients about this too. But this can be like a space to discuss. Free Action can be a place that we can talk about conflicts that come up at the table and talk about how to build community and how to exist within the messiness of that. It's going to be based in existential and liberation psychology of accompanying each other. But it is essentially like some like training wheels, where it's like training wheels of how to be connected with your emotions when you are playing a character, how to tell stories better. One of the things that I really enjoyed is how to write good villains, especially in storytelling, because it's not about like, I'm doing something terrible and you care. You're grieving that I'm doing this terrible thing because you care. What do you care about? How willing are you to fight for that? And people find that strength in themselves in those moments. So the villain writing is something that I just like absolutely love doing, to find these people who are, again, deeply human. But yeah, how to write villains and how those villains can evoke these emotions out of people and be deeply like, have deeply human themes. Yes, it might be a dragon. Yes, it might be like a demon or something, but like what they threaten within the human, what they threaten within the kind of finite mortal life is something that is potentially so powerful. And so that's something that I'm planning on using and talking about to help people explore, again, what are the things that I care about based on what I'm grieving? What are the things that I feel about this in this safer setting, that I'm with friends, that I'm with people? And what are ways that I can heal by going through this and it being okay that I care, and that it being okay that I feel passionate about this. And yeah, I think that on a therapeutic perspective, and this is one of the kind of caveats, is that it won't be a therapy channel necessarily. From the therapeutic component, I'm not asking dungeon masters and players to be therapists for each other. I'm not asking them to use psychological concepts in the way social media sometimes has people using them. What the point of it is essentially, how do we be with one another?
Yeah.
How do we be with one another in the messiness? And then when we move into the therapeutic element with people who are doing that kind of work, there is work that can be done on how a client's specific therapeutic needs can be addressed. So like I mentioned with veterans, and what re-experiencing trauma and re-experiencing grief can be like in that safer setting. And so again, that is within the therapeutic sense of things, but then being therapeutic with one another and being kind with one another, being in community, in messiness with one another is the focus of Free Action. It's essentially, what can we do for free with each other? What can we do that is available to one another? And so the Free Action is a kind of action you can take in D&D. It's just, oh, you like help somebody else. You can do this, you can pick up this object or something. It doesn't cost anything to do that. And so it's, how can we do things that don't cost anything? Help each other out. How can we do things that don't cost anything to liberate one another? Because a lot of times people feel powerless, resourceless, and you can have collective power and resources. But you don't need to have the individual power and resources to make huge changes as a specific individual changing everything. it can be done.
I'm so excited to see how this evolves. I think gameplay together, again, it's already a sense of community. And you were mentioning, like, okay, if we're having conflict with another player in the game, or how do we navigate that? I mentioned my partner plays World of Warcraft, and they have their like whole Discord channel, and they're in a guild and like all of those things, right? And he's one of the mediators in that. So when there's conflict among members of the guild, like he helps with having those critical conversations. And just because that's one of the things he was really passionate about, is like, how do I have hard conversations? And so he learned about that. And so I think creating a platform where you can help foster that sense of, okay, we can have conflict and we can move through it. Because I think so often when we're in conflict in our day-to-day adulty lives, we get in conflict and people just disconnect or ghost or cut off, instead of how do we lean in because we want to keep playing together. There's that driving motivation, like, this is fun, this is engaging, this is creative, this is a safe space, and I want it to stay a safe space. So how do I sit in that discomfort of conflict and figure out how to converse in a way that can help us move through it so we can get back to the premise of the game?
Yeah,
Does that fit?
exactly.
Am I close? Does that fit?
In a way, yeah. It's not even, because it's interesting, because even within that, there is that sense of like, how do I get past this and into the rest of the game? And it's, no, how do I integrate this into my story? How do I integrate this into who I am as a character, as a player? I'm not going to be like this monolithic two-dimensional being throughout. I'm going to allow the game to change me, and realizing I have the ability to change the game too. That's the thing with Dungeons and Dragons and other sort of tabletop. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of other types, but that's more my bread and butter, where you get to have an impact on the story. It's collaborative storytelling. And so with collaborative storytelling, you have the ability to make choices. Yes, it's not going to be the craziest choice. It's not going to be like the thing that ends the story, but it is something that you get to play out the story. You get to be part of it. You get to have an impact, and then the world impacts you much in the same way that the world does. So you
Yeah.
don't just do and then accept and then everything's fine. It's you do and accept and things change, and you have an impact and that impact on you. And I think that's so fun when that gets to happen at a table of players, and when you get to see people being changed by the game. And again, it's not on the dungeon master to make that happen. Oh, I see my friend struggling with this. Why don't I do this? I think that's wildly irresponsible. Don't do that. But I think if you're seeing like, oh, I'm going to bring up this conflict because I think it's an interesting kind of conflict, and then the character gets to address that in their way, right? In their way that highlights their strengths, that highlights their struggles. And when they get to do all of that, they get to have a way more meaningful experience. And again, when you connect to that meaning, what you care about, it changes you. You don't just move on saying, that was weird. You move on saying, huh, I am the person who saves this town. I am the character who worked to protect this one child, even though everything else was on fire in the story. I am the person who slayed the dragon in the end, right? You get to have this like character changing moment and feel what it's like to change, feel what it's like to experience change. And that's so cool when that happens.
And even hearing you talk about that, like, what's coming up for me is hearing the dungeon master, it's not their job to fix or rescue. If something's coming up for character development, it's
Yeah.
not the dungeon's master's job to fix or rescue it. It's to watch the characters interact, much as like a reflection of the therapy space. Like, our job, we are not advice givers. It is not our job to fix or rescue. We're there to hold space and ask questions and let our clients come to those conclusions and integrate on their own, which then changes the ripples, right? And you're doing this in the game in the same, that's so cool. Sorry.
Oh yeah,
It's
no, the
so
dungeon
cool.
master acts as a referee, and I honestly
Yeah.
see my job as being similar. It's like I'm aware of the rules of engagement, I'm aware
Yeah.
of the rules of the space, and I could be talking about either right now, honestly, and
Yeah.
bringing engagement
That
that way.
duality, I think, is
Exactly,
such a cool
the
reflection.
parallels are, there's so many of them between both roles, and it's very fun and often a boundary that I need to establish. But once that boundary is established, oh, good to have fun in both settings, honestly.
Absolutely. You should, yeah. And on your business cards, like psychologist and dungeon master.
Yeah, yeah, why not?
Okay, so as we start to wrap up today's conversation, this has just been so insightful. If someone is listening and feels disconnected from their grief or their emotions, or just don't know how to start feeling again, what's one gentle invitation or message you'd offer them?
One gentle invitation is I would ask people to consider what fills their life. I think that's the first question. because sometimes it is work, sometimes it's distraction, sometimes it's doom scrolling, often it's doom scrolling, where people are doing things that either may feel hollow or temporary or meaningless, right? And that's just the thing to notice at first. Just notice what you are doing. Be aware of what you're doing, coming into that mindfulness of how am I engaging or disengaging with the world. And that's the first kind of invitation to connection, connect with yourself. And then there's something that I go through. Thich Nhat Hanh has a lot of embodied meditation. I'm not a fan of the idea people have of meditation that I need to sit there and have no thoughts. I'm like, that's not happening. Embodied meditation of what comes to me, right? What comes to me when I'm washing the dishes? What comes to me when I'm walking? What comes to me during these rituals? What are the things that I'm carrying that I'm not aware of? And you can process that with somebody, but these things can be very difficult to do on your own. So that's why storytelling is a huge one, why music and media are huge as well. So a big one that I come back to personally to help me connect with literally every single one of these themes is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Got to do it, right? Once a year, extended editions only, please. It's just this wonderful combination of everything we've talked about today, this fantasy world that was created by a man who was grieving losses in World War I, who is expressing love for his wife, who's expressing love for his friends, his comrades in arms as well, and his history, the awareness of industrialization, like all of these themes coming up in that story, you witness once you know the story. And there's the music within it, the music that is so carefully planned to connect with those feelings, and the men within it. This is where masculinity comes in. The men, yes, there's a lot of men. It does not pass the Bechdel test at all, but it is still such a good source of witnessing non-toxic masculinity and toxic masculinity. But the villains are the ones with the toxic masculinity, and the heroes are the ones with the non-toxic kind. And that's awesome to see men who are feeling deep love, deep grief, deep connection, creative pursuits, cooking, even like drinking, dancing, singing, all those things, whether it's singing at the tavern or singing at a funeral, like there are these moments of expression, and we witness those, and those are the powerful moments because that's something that men deprive themselves of.
Yeah.
In the thoughts of this makes you more like that person who has stripped themselves of their feeling, who has restricted themselves so much, and they do not feel or care all that much. They just fear a lot. And that's why I connect with that story so well. And I feel like as you're doing bibliotherapy, I think that is something people can find in anything that they're reading. They can find who are these people I'm identifying with because of who I'd like to be in the world, because of what I value, what I care about in the world. And again, Lord of the Rings is just like this very grounding, inspiring, and a couple days long reminder of what it's like to try to survive and then live in a world that feels so big when we all feel very small and smaller every day.
And that I think that embodied grounding, like, what am I noticing coming up? I think that's such a good reminder to just orient to the space that we're in rather than quieting the thoughts. I talk about this with clients all the time. Like, you can't turn the thoughts off, they're going to keep coming. So, how do we just orient to what's happening around us and ground in that present, in that moment, in that here and now? So, thank you for that. And also, love Lord of the Rings. I can't wait until my son's just a little older and we're going to start reading The Hobbit first. And then we'll move into the Lord of the Rings books. We love all of those epic tales in our house.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Rohit, thank you so much for your time today. This great conversation. Any final thoughts or things that you were hoping we'd touch on that you haven't gotten to share about today?
Honestly, I think we covered quite a lot. I hope to embody with everything else is that we can use storytelling as ways to connect. We can use stories and media and all this as ways to connect, because ultimately when we watch Star Wars, we are with the rebels. When we watch the Hunger Games, we are with the rebels. We identify with all of those people because we are all witness to oppression. We are just having different reactions. And it is so important to keep that in mind when we are working with clients, when you're working with clients through the grief of seeing these losses of what we thought life was supposed to be and what we thought of freedom was, what we thought all this was. And so I want to mention that context in which we're having this conversation, because this is actively happening right now. And so it does fall to us to be able to be with one another in resistance, but also in rest and in joy
Yeah.
and in pain. That's mandatory if we're going to be able to get through all of this and come out the other side again, not back to normal.
Absolutely. Thank you for naming that context. I think that's really important. This space of collective grief that we're in, and that life isn't how we thought it was going to be, and the very active oppression and pain and violence that we are witnessing in our news and media on a daily basis. And yeah, and that call to connect and to be in community and to resist together and to rest together. I appreciate you naming that. Yeah. All right, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. Remember to be kind to yourselves, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If something landed for you, share it, because grief deserves more space in the world, not less. You can find show notes, resources, and more at thedrheathertaylor.com. And if no one has said it to you today, your grief is real, it matters, and you don't have to carry it alone. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.